provide the folks that are just coming into the industry some general understanding of what ransomware is. So for some of you folks who've been in the industry, please bear with us. Jonathan is going to do a tremendous job explaining what a ransomware is, but primarily how to combat ransomware using, proper preparedness techniques and detection techniques, as well as response and, how to respond to a potential ransomware. As we all know, we live in a world of inevitability. So it's all about how do you respond in those types of scenarios if they were to occur. So as was mentioned earlier, I've been in the industry for a while. I was the CISO for a financial services organization in Alpharetta called Factor Trust that was acquired by TransUnion. And I primarily saw a gap with automated cybersecurity risk intelligence. And that's what FortifyData primarily focuses on, using automated techniques to identify potential security issues from an external, internal, as well as your third parties, and providing this sort of continuous visibility of risk exposure across your entire attack surface. So that's what my organization does. Jonathan is also an industry expert, former military, U.S. captain, captain in the U.S. Army. So he's going to give you a general overview of what a ransomware is, but also give you some visibility as to how to combat cyber ransomware attacks and respond to certain types of attacks if your organization were to experience it. So I'm not going to bore you all with some general stats, but for some of you who may not be aware, 30% of global organizations say they were a victim of ransomware, which is huge. And as you may know, this industry is always changing. Some of you may be familiar with the Conti ransomware attack on Costa Rican government, which crippled the government. We'll talk about that in the next slide. The FBI has recently put out a report that over 2,000 ransomware complaints were submitted just July from January to July in 2021. And this is a 62% year-over-year increase. This year, we're still getting those types of stats. So as you can imagine, it's only going to get worse. As some of you may know, there are other variants of ransomware that keep evolving and coming out. So Jonathan will talk a little bit about that. And so we talked about the Costa Rica ransomware that occurred April of this year, I believe. And this is, ransomware is a major problem for a lot of organizations. It's one of those things where if you don't prepare the right way, your organization could very well not only get crippled, but you could potentially go out of business. Organizations like the Lincoln College, they actually had to close for other reasons, but primarily the ransomware attack was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And they did the wrong thing and actually paid the ransom. But as you may very well know, and hopefully Jonathan will talk a little bit about the Conti ransomware, because I think that's very interesting. The Conti ransomware it not only encrypts the data, but it has the potential and the capacity of replicating or copying that information. So even if you make a ransomware payment, you could very well still be exploited and required to make a payment afterwards, to not disclose that information because the hackers will very well have copies of it. So the Conti ransomware is quite interesting. I know we keep emphasizing that, but there are many other variants that keep coming out. So the goal, again, is to make sure that we take proactive measures in identifying vulnerabilities from an external standpoint across your entire attack surface. Some of you may very well know with the Costa Rican government, the threat actors actually used stolen credentials to gain access, VPN access. So looking at threat intelligence data, as well as performing vulnerability assessments, continuous vulnerability assessments, not compliance-based, which is maybe every quarter, every 6 months or whatever. This sort of continuous visibility, monitoring your attack surface from an external standpoint, but also the dark web or threat intelligence data is very important, because you could very well be able to identify compromised credentials, business compromised credentials that will be exposed. And obviously hackers have access to this bulk of data that they've been able to acquire for gaining access into the environment. There are still some other methods that were used primarily in the Costa Rican ransomware attack, but the most important thing is they got in through the VPN using compromised credentials, and they did some other things within the environment once they had access, and there was lateral movements, and they compromised some resources, and then encrypted various drives. And again, Jonathan will talk about the speed of Conti, because it's way faster than in terms of encryption process. It's way faster than traditional, but like I mentioned earlier, there are many other variants of ransomware. So you always want to be prepared for those types of cyber attacks. So again, I'll welcome Jonathan to the stage. Please give him a round of applause, and he'll give you a general overview of detection response of ransomware attacks. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Hey, can everybody hear me? Everybody can hear me? So my name's Jonathan. Everybody's kind of already introduced me. I'm an engineer. I'm not, a guy that usually does this kind of stuff with sales or anything. So I'm really more on the technical side. Who's an engineer? Who's a technical person in here? Okay, great. So I'm kind of a lot more like you guys. I usually like to make these a little bit more interactive than just me talking at people. If you have either a question or, like an experience that may even be different than what I'm going to talk about, just kind of raise your hand and we'll talk about it, because it'll probably be valuable for everybody here. So quick introduction to ransomware. So we are not, my company, Lockstep Technology Group, we are not an incident response firm. However, we have done more than 10 ransomware responses this year, just because people come and say, you guys do security, we need help. Because frankly, right now, this is happening so often that a lot of the IR firms and stuff like that, they can't even respond, especially law enforcement. They're completely overbooked with a lot of this stuff, just because it's happening so regularly at the moment. So again, if you've seen some of this stuff that we're going to talk about, just kind of raise your hand and add your experience too. This takes a second. Okay, you have to point it. So what is ransomware? And we kind of already went over this a little bit, but basically it's a malicious program that utilizes vulnerabilities and initial access and all kind of things like that to encrypt hard drives, files, valuable things, to basically create a ransom situation so that you have to pay someone or perform an action in order to get your data back. We already talked about kind of where it's going, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. The reason I've got these pictures up here is not because it's political or anything. These two usually don't get along very well. But at one point last year, they both had the same story right at the top of their page. Did you guys have trouble filling up your car last year? Everybody remember when the Colonial Pipeline got hit? Same time, a couple months later, they had a meat processor get hit and nobody could find meat. So all of a sudden, this has become something that actually affects your day-to-day life, as opposed to, we got hacked, nobody really knows what that means, nobody really knows what the effect is. Well, now you can't fill up your car and it matters. You have to point it. So ransomware is not new. It actually, the first ransomware variant was the AIDS Trojan in 1989. This guy, not the guy in the picture, Dr. Pop was a AIDS, he was a medical doctor that was working with the WHO, and he wrote a program that would encrypt the C drive of whatever computer after 90 boots. If you did not pay for the licensed product, and then you had to send him like a certified check to a PO box in Panama to get your computer unencrypted. This guy wasn't, in cyber or IT or anything. He was just mad people weren't paying for his program, so he wrote a code into his AIDS tracking program to encrypt C drive. The picture is one of the people who actually got their C drive encrypted, and he kept the floppy disk with the instructions on how to get it decrypted. So this is not new, it's just become more common. Okay, will this increase or decrease? 2018, the GAN Crab ransomware variant version 1 kind of came on the scene. It was actually pretty quickly debunked because there was a cyber researcher, who was later arrested by the FBI, who found all the decryption keys on a server that was placed on the internet. So basically the ransomware variant was useless. They went back to the drawing board, came out with version 2 in 2019. And then they posted this retirement letter on one of the dark web sites, claiming that they have made more than $2 billion in profit in 5 months. And they're claiming that they're going to retire because this is super easy and this is their well-deserved money and all this kind of stuff. Now, with that kind of profit margin business model, is that going to increase or decrease? How easy is it to make? I don't know if they actually made $2 billion in profit or not, but they're probably making pretty good money. If you go rob a bank today, it may go okay for you one time, maybe, but you're probably going to get caught and you're probably going to have a very bad outcome if you try to do something like that. If you do this, you're probably not going to get caught and you're probably going to make way more money than if you were to rob a bank. So this kind of business model is not just going to increase, it's going to explode like it's doing right now. We don't think that they actually retired. They probably just changed their name from GAN Crab to Revil, which is probably a familiar name for everybody here. And then Revil kind of swapped over and then became Black Matter. They've kind of become Revil again. They're going back and forth. They can't decide what their name's going to be. But this is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. Okay, most common strains right now. These are the ones we're seeing most regularly: Lockbit, Conti, AlphaV. These are the ones that are the most common strains that we're seeing in most places. So this has actually become something called ransomware as a service. I know several of the dark web sites that I unfortunately have to visit regularly where you can actually purchase pre-coded strains of some of these ransomware variants, and you can become an RAS provider. So a ransomware as a service provider. You can actually become a provider, and then you can talk to the initial developers of the program and then give them a cutback of the companies that you encrypt. So it's funny that a lot of these things even have like reviews on a lot of these darknet sites where, yeah, this works 50% of the time. I've made X amount of money, where they've actually got reviews of real customers. So these are, criminals having customer reviews on their website. Some of them have things like ethics. It's actually interesting. The two images here are two different encryption notices. So the one at the top, I believe, let's see, who's that? I think that one's, yeah, the top one's Lockbit and the bottom one is Conti. So generally what you're going to see when they actually drop these on your, basically what you're going to see is you log into your computers on usually Monday morning, and you've either got this changed to your desktop background, or they're going to drop a text file on all the systems that they encrypt. And this is what they usually look like. And they're going to tell you to get on Tor and how to start a conversation with them. Okay, so how does this process start? 99.99% of the time, it's some form of credential abuse. So other companies on the dark, I say companies, criminal groups on the dark web, darknet, all these different places, they're called initial access brokers, where the only thing they do is get access into companies. So they'll find some way, either through phishing or through vishing in some cases, which is voice phishing, where they'll actually still call people, or they'll use exposed credentials from other leaks, or many different ways to find initial access into your company. 99.99% of the time, the initial access is through some form of credential abuse. I say 99.9 because I've actually seen one where that was not the case this year. They had a Windows Server 2003 that was never patched facing the internet. And that's how they got in, because if you've got something that's that old facing the internet, you should stop that immediately. But that's the vast majority of the time, that's how they're getting in initially. Once they get in, they're going to find some form of either exploit, malware, so we're talking like remote code execution vulnerabilities, to then propagate through your systems, and then that's how they're actually going to, honestly, ransomware looks like a pen test in the box, which is really where I'm going with this. So if you look at the methods and the process that a lot of these groups use, it's kind of like a penetration test. You get access, you perform reconnaissance, you look around, see what's on your network. Where can I move? Can I laterally move from this to that? Does this credential that I initially got access to, does it work on these servers? Can I log in? Can I do privilege escalation? Is there an exploit on this or that box? All that kind of stuff is kind of similar. Ransomware in many ways is very similar to penetration tests. Victor kind of mentioned this. There's a new step that was added in 2021, which is the secondary extortion. So initially, the extortion method is we've encrypted your data, you can't use anything. Well, the new extortion, and there's actually a new one I saw last week, and we'll talk about that in a minute, is extracting data. So not only are they going to encrypt your data, they're going to extract whatever they can. So even if you're able to recover, we're going to publish all of this. And I'm going to show you pictures of that in a second. So that's the secondary extortion. The tertiary one, which we've seen this year, is attempting to take over your company's website and deface the company's internet-facing website if you don't pay. So that's fun too. So living off the land is a little sub point I put there. How are they doing all of this stuff? How are they doing, all this data exfiltration and things? One thing that's super popular is for them to use whatever platform, programs, whatever you have already in your environment instead of installing new tools. Again, that's not going to happen every time. But let's say you use PDQ deploy, right? To push out software updates, whatever have you. PDQ deploy is something that lots of IT shops use all the time because it's free. It's really easy to use. It's easy to push information out. Well, it is also easy for attackers to push out the encryption protocol, or not the protocol, the encryption program out to all of your systems and then tell it to run. So it doesn't look like they're using a new tool. And that's called living off the land. Destroy backups. Before they actually run the encryption program, they're always going to go look for your backups and try to destroy them. For the technical people in the room, let's say you're able to exploit a Windows box and pull the SAM file off the Windows box, which is going to have username and hash generally of most of the user accounts that have ever logged into that. What if you got a service account in there that runs nightly on that? What if that service account is a domain or a local admin that works on all the boxes? Well, guess what? They've got all of those accounts too. Now, if your backups are run with a similar service account or even the same one in some cases, what can they now do to your backups? They can access your backups, destroy them, do whatever they want, which is why air gapping is so important. We'll get to that if I have time. Number 6, distribute the payload and then detonate it. So the last step you usually see is going to be the actual encryption. That's by far the last step. Some of these groups have been in, just like Chris was saying in the keynote, some of these groups stay in for months. Revil is that way. Generally, Revil is going to be in the environment for sometimes 6 months more, or even longer before they run this program. Some of them separately are as short as 4 hours. So these ransomware groups have very different tactics, techniques, and procedures, but their process is generally pretty similar. Next. Okay, so this is an image from the Dharma Rogers ransomware variant. This one, they actually change all the desktop backgrounds to this. So it's some of them, it's weird. And in some cases, we find that it's really hard to find the actual ransom note. I don't know why they make it that way, but sometimes they do. Obviously, in this case, it's very obvious because everybody who has a domain joined Windows system generally are the devices affected are going to have their desktop background changed to this, which is obviously not what they had the day before. And then this is just, telling them what to do. No cops, all that kind of stuff that you usually see. Okay, so we're going to actually go over some of the effects of ransomware groups. This is an onion site. So an onion site is just a site on Tor, which is probably the most popular dark net. There are many other dark nets. I've got a week-long class on dark stuff, which is awesome. I don't have time to go into all that, but this is an onion site where a guy actually keeps this up, where he has links to all the onion sites of the active ransomware groups. So if you want to see the shame site, which is what they call them, of each one of these, and which, by the way, anybody here can get on Tor. I don't recommend you doing that without doing a little bit of research and understanding what you're doing before you get on the dark web. So please be careful. Don't do this on company networks if you do decide to do so. However, you can go to each one of these links and see the shame sites of all these ransomware variants, which is basically where they post their victories, if you will, over companies that they've been able to encrypt. And you can see Conti's on there, Clot, Black Matter, Alpha V, all these are on there. And this is just a continuation. I've seen Lauren's this year. I've seen Revel. I've seen Conti. Sodinikibi, which is also that. So ransomware market sites, these go up and down all the time because the FBI is constantly trying to bring them down, as they should. But these are sites where you can purchase ransomware variants and actually use them, become a ransomware as a service provider, or in some cases purchase data dumps. But those are the market sites where you can go. Okay, so this is a shame site from the Clop ransomware group. Anybody recognize a name there? Stanford University. So what they're claiming is we have been able to effectively implement our ransomware variant there. And what they show as proof are things like this. So they'll put up people's tax records. So this is a live tax record that's on Clop's ransomware shame site. Social security number, all kind of stuff, revenue. There's another one. University of Miami. Medical health records, because there's a VA hospital there, of persons with actual records. Donor information, demographics, health records, and they just post this stuff on their website. And this is in order to kind of cudgel them into actually paying. Here's another one. This one's Conti. Broward County Public Schools. This is Miami's Broward County. So there's a lot of really valuable stuff there. Recently, a 7-year-old was denied a loan for a car because a school lost their information. So does this matter? Yes, it does. It absolutely does. More information here. Moving on past things like money, what if a school's medical health records, so their mental health records, are exposed? What do you think about a student that may have gone to a mental health counselor at a school and all of those records get dumped on the internet? You're talking about way more than just money at this point. We're not even talking about people taking out loans. We're talking about, people that are thinking about suicide and things like that if stuff like that gets out there. So this is way beyond just money. Okay, for my technical people, what is that? What is that a dump of? Anybody? That is an Active Directory dump. Yes, exactly, right. It's not good if this gets dumped onto the internet for the world to see, right? Because you don't really want your OU structure and system names out there on the internet. But this is another thing. I think who's this one? This is Doppel ransomware. So this is the kind of stuff that they dump on their shame sites so people can be forced to pay. Windows Server 2008, not a surprise. Whoa, there we go. We got a Windows Server 2003 too. Not good. Okay, so what do we do? This kind of goes back to the program or the thinking mindset of defense in depth. So this is a security, I really want to say beyond best practice, it's really a security mindset as opposed to, do this or that control, great. We'll talk about controls and all kind of stuff like that, but this is a mindset that you kind of have to adopt. Just like Chris was saying during the keynote, there is no such thing as 100% security, but we can do everything we can to prevent this from happening. So what is defense in depth? Let's say you've got a sheet of paper that has super important information. Okay, I want to protect this sheet. I'm going to put that into a cabinet, and then I'm going to lock the cabinet. And then I'm going to have that cabinet in an office, and I'm going to lock the door to the office. And then that office is going to be in a building, and I'm going to lock the door to the building. And then the building is surrounded by a fence that's got barbed wire and all this kind of stuff. Does any one of those, are any one of those measures individually perfect? Absolutely not. You can pick locks, you can go over under fences, you can cut through fences, all that kind of stuff. Great. But what we want to do is create more obstacles for an attacker to get through before they can get to their goal. Is there 100% security? No, there is not. It just doesn't exist. However, if we make it much harder, they're probably going to move on. Here's the thing about hackers. If you take offensive security certifications and stuff in the company, but what's the motto? The motto is try harder, right? Well, the thing about hackers is hackers are lazy. That's what they are. They're going to want to spend the least amount of time and effort to get to the goal of whatever they want to do. So the goal is not being perfect. It's not being perfect. It's being better than the organizations on your left and right, so they leave you alone and go somewhere else, right? If I don't want to get ate by the bear, do I have to outrun the bear or the guy next to me, right? I just have to outrun you, the guy next to me, which is not good for me, but. Okay, so we're going to talk about defense in depth in three primary categories: prevention, detection, and recovery. Okay, prevention. Everybody's seen the Dave cartoon by now, right? I've been using this cartoon for 5 or 10 years in a lot of my presentations. But the first thing is people. What did I say was 99.9% of the way they originally get in? What is it? It's credential abuse. It's some form of credential abuse. Why do credentials matter? Well, what credentials are is a way for a user to assert who they are to authorize, right? Well, what does that mean? That means a human's involved. That's what credentials are. Even in some cases where you've got service accounts and stuff like that, yeah, it's still a credential, but in most cases, credentials that are used for initial access are people. It's people. So training people is super important. There are products you can use to do this. When I do this for organizations, I like to do it a little differently and kind of make it interactive. If you as an IT director go and change the password policy in Active Directory, and Monday when everybody comes in, they're going to have a 16-character password, and it's going to have all this kind of craziness. Everybody's going to get the torches and pitchforks and come post up outside your office because they hate you. Instead of doing that, why don't we train people by showing them a little demo? So I'll show a 3 or 4 minute demo of password cracking. I'll show people how easy it is to crack passwords. That's not hard to do. The tools are free. You can get on YouTube and figure out how to use them. Because if you tell people, if you've got kids, if you tell a kid just because I said so, how often does that work? It never works. It doesn't work. Better thing to do is to explain why, try to help them understand before you implement those things. And it's the same with people. So if you show them how easy it is to crack passwords, okay, great, I get it. Now how am I supposed to remember all of these? Well, great. Let's use passphrases. Let's use, for instance, the space bar is a special character that's accepted by Active Directory. Most people don't know that. So if you use like a song lyric or a famous quote or scripture memory or whatever have you, and it's not like the tagline on the front of your Facebook page, that's a great password. And it's much easier for the human brain to remember than this gobbledygook 16-character craziness. How about you use a password manager? There's a bunch of free ones out there that are great, that'll work on your iPhone. And this is how it'll make your life easier. If you get users on your side before you just tell them to do something, it usually goes over much better. Endpoint protection. Chris talked about endpoint protection. Yep. There is nothing perfect. It won't stop everything. Will it stop a lot? Yes, it will in some cases. Needs to be behavior and heuristic based, not just signature based. Is it perfect? No. A lot of these ransomware as a service providers, they're not rocket scientists. They're not that great. In fact, in many cases, a lot of these ransomware programs have GUI front ends for you to launch them. So we're not talking about the actual developers of the initial code of the ransomware. We're talking about people who aren't really that technical. So in many cases, this stuff can be stopped. Vulnerability and patch management. Oh my gosh, this is super important. You need to be scanning for vulnerabilities constantly. The number of 9 to 9.5 out of 10 Windows vulnerabilities that have come out in the last year is insane. It seems like every single month, Microsoft is patching a new critical vulnerability. Same thing with your virtualization software and whatever else have you. It's constantly coming out. Every single month, there's a critical vulnerability. So you can't pretend this stuff doesn't exist anymore. Operating systems is another big thing. I kind of mentioned like the Windows Server 2003, just get rid of it. I've seen a Windows Server 2000 recently. That was impressive. And I told him I was in high school when that operating system came out. So third-party applications, you can't just do operating system stuff. So last year, one of the most exploited vulnerabilities was an Apache vulnerability. Which means you can't just worry about Windows. You got to worry about all those applications and frameworks and stuff like that that you have on the systems as well. Something I see with IT people all the time, things like PuTTY, Wireshark, those programs that you use all the time to put out a fire. I'm trying to figure out this networking problem, so I install Wireshark on a system. Well, if you don't update Wireshark, it's got a 9.5 out of 10 remote code execution vulnerability that allows me to take over system on that computer, right, or the server. So a lot of times what will happen is you'll install Wireshark, fix your problem, put out the fire, leave Wireshark on there because you've got another thing to worry about, and then all of a sudden you've introduced a remote code execution vulnerability. Entitlement reviews. Why does ransomware work? It works because people can do things. That's why. You have to, as security people, all we want to do is just turn everything off and shut it down, and then nobody can do anything. We're happy, right? Well, you can't do that. You have to operate in a world where people can do things. However, we need to make sure that they can only do what they need to do. They don't need to have local administrator rights. Local administrator rights will burn you to the ground. They don't need things like, the CEO does not need to be a domain administrator just because they want to be. I see that all the time. Stuff like that. Entitlement reviews are critical. And then assessing. It's very easy, and I've been a CISO, so I've been here too. When you look at your own stuff all the time to kind of have rose-colored glasses and whatnot, you need somebody else to actually take a look and help you see what you can't see. There we go. All right, so we talked about prevention. We want to spend the most time and effort on prevention because the best thing we want to do is prevent it from actually happening. The problem is that's also the hardest return on investment to prove to people where you actually have a budget, right? If everybody had unlimited budgets and time, this would be much easier, but we don't. And prevention is where you should spend the most of your time and effort, but it's also harder to prove ROI to the people that give you money because it's prevention. It's prevention of a problem that you're trying to convince them exists when they haven't actually seen it. Much easier to do this after an actual ransomware detonation. Detection. Okay, so how do we catch this stuff? Ransomware is generally very loud. A lot of the groups like Revil are very quiet, very slow, very meticulous. Some of the other ones, I think Conti's in this group, are very loud and fast. However, if you're not watching the things that they are using to actually do things in your network, then you're never going to know. It doesn't matter if they're allowed or not. Perimeter. So one of the first things that ransomware is going to do after it gets access and then is able to exploit a system is make a command and control or a C2 call out to the handler. Well, they actually have to take over that system or that C2 call before they can start doing their propagation, reconnaissance, things like that. Again, it differs from variant to variant. However, that's loud. That gets caught by most modern, next gen, whatever have you, I don't know what, term it is, next gen, AI, awesome, whatever firewall it is. If it's making a C2 call out, that's a very noisy thing. But even if it catches it, even if it's a critical alert, did you see it? Are you listening? Or do you have 1,000 critical alerts in your email inbox and you've got alarm fatigue and you have no idea, but you can't see that one that actually matters, which is a real C2 call out. One of the responses we did, I think this was Lauren's, we actually stopped it before detonation because we caught a C2 call out from Cobalt Strike. So Cobalt Strike's a very common pen testing platform, and it's very noisy. So it made a C2 call out to the ransomware group, and Russia is actually kind of interesting right now because they're not even trying to hide because they feel like they're at war with the world. It was a C2 call out to Russia, and we caught that, and then it wasn't able to detonate because we figured out what accounts were being used to run all that stuff. So that's kind of one place you can catch stuff. Privileged accounts. So monitoring what is done with privileged accounts. There's lots of different ways to do this. There are plenty of products out there that'll do this, but there's also some free ways to do a lot of this stuff. Things like PowerShell are extremely powerful. Now, the trick is you have to know how to use it. You have to know how to do things with it. Like we've got this guy that'll have PowerShell make him a cup of coffee. But what I'm saying is it can do incredible things in your environment to show you pieces of information, to make changes, to do all kind of stuff like that. So there exist free ways to do a lot of this stuff if you've got the skill to do it. Monitor system events. Eventually, a ransomware variant has to take over a system. It's going to take over, if you get initial access, then you're going to take over either a Windows workstation or a Windows server. And I say that just because 99.9% of the time we're talking about an Active Directory Windows-based domain joined environment. That's the vast majority of what these are. It's going to have to take over a system. Well, if you've got something, and again, I'm not a fan of being a product shill. If you've got a behavior-based system that's taking in all system events, you can see things like this account logged in or user on this system, Outlook.exe opens Word.exe, which attempts to open PowerShell as admin. That's a system process that's very noisy. There should never be a case where Word.exe opens PowerShell.exe. In most cases, like that's something that you should definitely flag on. So system events can be a very clear flag. And then email detection, right? I mean, there's plenty of things you can see in email as well, but none of these is perfect. You can't just do one of these. What was the overarching principle we talked about stopping this? What was it called? Defense in depth, right? So we don't want to just listen to one of these and think we're good. We need to listen to all of them so you can probably catch it before it actually detonates. All right, so we've been through prevention and detection and now recovery. It has actually occurred. Now what are we going to do about it? Air gap backups, air gap backups, air gap backups. I don't mean you have to like physically air gap stuff like they used to do in Central Intelligence back in the day. Like, everybody saw the first Mission Impossible where Tom Cruise had to like get on the thing and like rappel down to the computer to actually touch it because it's never connected to any network. They still do a lot of that stuff, by the way, but the point is you don't actually have to do that where you have no physically connected network. What you do want to do is things like making sure the accounts that run your backups or your offsite backups, let's say you've got like an Azure or AWS backup once a week or once a month or something like that, The accounts that are used to run those backup processes should not be in Active Directory. Why? Well, if I'm able to get into a system that has a service account that's a domain admin, and I'm able to take over that account, what do I have access to? Well, I have access to all of Active Directory. That's generally what's going to happen. Now, if the accounts in your backups are not in Active Directory, I don't have access to those backups. Even if I am able to do a full domain compromise, I still don't have access to the backups. So that's critical. Other things, shutting down like ports outbound and inbound to specific dates and times where the actual backup's occurring. There are lots of ways you can like very carefully scope out your backup process to protect it and keep it away from the rest of your systems most of the time. Response plan. Nobody wants to write stuff down. Policies and procedures and stuff like that, I hate it. It's super boring. However, it's very important. Nobody needs a response plan until it's time to respond. And you don't usually think about it until it's time to respond. So you need to write it out. You need to have things like, let's say your systems go down, somebody's got to restore domain controllers in Active Directory. Well, what happens if you get hit by a bus? That's kind of likely. Let's say meteor. Let's say you get hit by a meteor on the way in to restore everything. What's going to happen? Are you the only person that can do that in your organization? Or is there a written out plan that's protected that may even be kept on like a physical sheet of paper in a safe in the IT department that says, go to this IP address, not necessarily, what if DNS is down? Go to this IP address, log in with this local username and password, go through these steps, click on this, pull up this system so that somebody else, some other engineer can bring your company back up. Again, that kind of stuff, especially, I've never met somebody in IT who's like, you know what, we've got so much extra time on our hands, we're going to like audit our OU structure or something like that, right? That doesn't happen. So this response plans, planning and stuff like that usually goes by the wayside until you need it. Okay, so questions, comments, concerns, complaints. I really didn't like that guy. So the thing that I would recommend that you do is look at solutions that will help you implement defense in depth. So that's everything from assessing, vulnerability management, and things like that. I used to be a CISO, now I'm a consultant, and it's way better because I'm not actually like in charge of things. I'm not actually responsible for domains and systems anymore. But you really want a platform that's going to help you do a lot of that kind of stuff. Victor was talking earlier. He used to be a CISO. He's an engineer. And where the FortifyData platform kind of came in was where you can integrate a lot of those pieces of defense in depth in a place that works for engineers and for people in the business management side. So that's usually where you have this huge gap is you have an engineer that says, hey, I can take over this printer and do whatever I want. And then you have a business person saying, okay, why do I care? Well, how do I turn that into information that's business intelligence and risk information? That's really kind of what the platform, that's why I was originally attracted to it. Any questions? Anybody have questions? Yeah, shoot.
Most of the ransomware stories I hear about are someone's PC, someone's network, et cetera. Are you seeing anything where someone wakes up and like Salesforce is encrypted or their OneDrive account is encrypted, something like that?
Have heard of it, have not seen it myself. It does exist, it does occur, especially when those back-end systems or, like the SQL database on the back end is like a domain joined, MSQL server or something like that. Sure, yeah, you do. It's way more rare. The vast majority of the outbreaks we see are going to be domain joined, Windows-based AD environments. And in many cases, what we've seen is, like, let's say you've got a fleet of Macs or Apple products. Those usually, which is, again, everybody knows it's just a Linux or Nix-based OS, right? Those usually aren't affected because the program is meant to specifically target, what most governments and businesses operate off of. But that's not exclusive. That's just the majority.
We have a question from our live stream.
Sure.
Do you have a suggestion for a cybersecurity framework for a SaaS company that doesn't have information security controls in place?
A SaaS company, so you're a software provider, so I imagine you're a developer, right? So there are secure development codes so NIST has a good framework. Honestly, I need to know a little bit more about the business. Is our information and stuff available for them, like emails and stuff? Shoot me an email with more information, and I can more accurately describe that. Just quick note for a good friend of mine. One of my buddies is Tim Tomes, Landmaster 53. He's one of the best web app security guys in the world, no questions asked. He has a fantastic 3-day practical web app pen testing course that's made for developers. So just Google Landmaster 53 and you can look up his stuff. It's one of the best courses out there. Who else? Any other question? You want to come on? Cool. You're welcome. Come find me later too.
So for the gentleman that asked the question about OneDrive or maybe third-party applications that may be in some way connected, or you may have employees using domain credentials authenticating into third-party apps. This is why it's so important to perform an active-based attack surface assessment on those third parties, right? So taking the traditional methods of not only risk identification or vulnerability identification, including threat intelligence monitoring for your organization, but employing that same concept on third-party risks or on your third-party or supply chain. I think that would give you that visibility, because 9 times out of 10, your employees use their same domain credentials to register on these third-party apps. And when those apps get compromised and that data is being published on the dark web, obviously the hackers have that ability to authenticate into mission-critical systems within the organization. Hope that answers your question.
Anybody else?
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.